is ignoring evidence on the other side of the issue. So you take all the cards and all the proof on your side and you ignore the opposition. For example, 1 in 5 people surveyed do not believe that the earth is round. Well, it could be that 1 in 5 people questioned it, didn't answer, or maybe they answered, I don't know, or they answered, I don't care. But this writer is not paying any attention to the other people and what they said. That undermines the writer's believability or credibility. It's also a logical fallacy when you offer an either or, one or the other choice. You don't give any other options. This is wrong because there are usually many other choices as well. For example, the case is clear. Either we support the death penalty or we allow crime to run rampant. Well, it's not as simple as that, because you may not want to support the death penalty, and therefore you may offer some other options. You may say perhaps we could have different programs in prisons, or we could have some kind of early intervention. But by offering only 2 choices, you're undermining your believability. A false analogy is another type of logical fallacy. And this is a misleading comparison. For example, why am I required to take specific classes before I can graduate from this school? No one requires me to buy specific products before I leave the grocery store. In this analogy or comparison, you're comparing school to grocery stores. They cannot logically be compared because they're not similar enough. A school is not a grocery store, and a grocery store is not a school. A school mandates certain courses, such as algebra or trigonometry. A grocery store does not mandate that you do anything. Some people have to go to school because of their age. Nobody has to go to a grocery store. They could shop in other ways. So this is a false analogy because these 2 things cannot logically be compared. Faulty cause and effect results when you link things that do not belong together. Because B follows A, you assume that A must cause B. Just because 2 events are related does not necessarily mean that one causes the other. For example, because I had my lucky charm, I passed my math test. Well, no, you probably passed your math test because you studied hard, because you understand the material, you went for extra help, you have a very good teacher, you read the book. Having your lucky charm did not cause you to pass your math test. Another kind of logical fallacy is guilt by association. This is when you attack a person because of the person's friends or other associates. This was the basis of McCarthyism in the 1950s, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Here's an example. Rick Henderson is an embezzler. Therefore, his entire family is crooked. No. Just because Rick is an embezzler does not mean that the rest of his family is an embezzler. You cannot tar his family with the same brush that you used on Rick because the 2 are not related. You cannot associate them. Now, as you can tell, there's a lot of logical fallacies, which means that it's very important to pay close attention to your logic. Because if not, you can rather easily slip into one of these problems. For example, a hasty generalization. That's when you reach a generalization or a conclusion from inadequate evidence. Stereotyping is an example of a hasty generalization. For example, of course our students are physically fit. Just look at the success of our sports team this year. Well, just because your sports teams are successful does not mean that your students are physically fit. It means only that the athletes on the team are physically fit. The rest of the students may not be physically fit at all. You're forming a generalization that is not valid. Or you could have an irrelevant argument. This is also called a non sequitur. You probably have heard that phrase. It's from Latin, and it means it does not follow. A non sequitur, or an irrelevant argument, is a conclusion that does not relate to the main idea, which is also called the premise. For example, if we could put a man on the moon, why can't we find a cure for the common cold? Well, putting a man on the moon has nothing whatsoever to do with the common cold. They are not at all related. And by linking them, you are bringing in an argument that is not relevant, and therefore you're committing an error in logic. Jumping on the bandwagon is suggesting that something is right just because everybody else is doing it. For example, a recent poll showed that 70% of the American public believes that emissions requirements on automobiles have gone too far. Therefore, these laws are unreasonable and should be repealed. Well, no, the laws might be very reasonable and should not be repealed. And just because people have jumped on that bandwagon does not mean that they are right. It simply means that they are following. A loaded term is a slanted or a biased term. It's especially terms that have strong connotations that evoke positive or negative feelings in your readers. For example, the same group of people could be described as fighting for independence or freedom fighters if you agree with their cause, or you could describe them as separatist movement or rabble rousers if you don't. The first two descriptions are positive because you agree. The second two descriptions are negative because you don't. Pay very close attention to the words that you choose, that they don't carry connotations, emotional overtones, that will unfairly influence your readers. Next, we have misrepresentation. That's when you deliberately lie. You just don't tell the truth. For example, Hurricane Katrina was caused by an excess of greenhouse gas emissions. That simply is not the truth. Hurricane Katrina was not caused by greenhouse gas emissions. That would be an example of a misrepresentation. You can also oversimplify the issue. That's when you twist the truth by making it much more simple than it really is. Many complex issues are complex because they have multiple causes and effects. And if you reduce it too far, you've oversimplified it and you're no longer telling the truth. For example, people who want to be healthy should eat spinach. My Uncle Louis ate a lot of spinach and he lived to be 99. Well, perhaps you should eat spinach, it probably won't hurt you, but that's too narrow an issue. Uncle Louis lived to be 99 probably because he had good genes, he exercised, he stayed out of the way of moving vehicles, and he didn't smoke. But by presenting only spinach, you're grossly oversimplifying that issue. A red herring is a logical fallacy whereby you divert the issue with an unrelated topic. Now, red herrings are very good to use in fiction, especially in detective stories, because they help create suspense by leading you off the main idea and into an unrelated path. So they're really good in fiction, but they're very not good in nonfiction. For example, I shouldn't have to pay a fine for speeding. The police should be chasing dangerous criminals, not harassing a decent tax-paying citizen like me. Well, your red herring is that the police should be chasing dangerous criminals. That has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that you got a speeding ticket. You got a speeding ticket, you were speeding, you should pay a fine. End of story. But by bringing in the criminals, you're trying to divert your audience from the main idea. That is not an ethical form of reasoning to use in nonfiction. A self-contradiction is when you argue two premises that cannot be true because they cancel each other out. For example, the government should control this unmanageable situation. Well, if it's unmanageable, it cannot be managed, and the government can't control it. Nobody can control it because it cannot be managed. There are other logical fallacies as well. These are the most common, and now that you know these, you'll be on the lookout for all errors in logic in your writing. Remember, too, that logic also includes using valid evidence to back up your assertions. When you use facts or statistics and other examples, be sure to check them in at least 2 reliable sources so you know that they're true. This is especially important when you use internet sources. Make sure that you're using valid sources so your information is solid. Be very careful to distinguish between facts and opinions. Facts are statements that can be proven. You can find them in valid research materials such as encyclopedias or newspapers and good magazines and solid web pages. Opinions are things that people believe. You can use your facts to prove your point, but opinions are a lot more slippery because you cannot prove whether they are right or whether they are wrong. Also be sure to analyze cause and effect correctly. Cause is why something happens, the reasons, and effects are the result. Don't confuse the two. But above all else, make sure that you make sense. When you finish your writing, be sure that you're saying what you think that you're saying, and that your paragraph holds together logically. So now what I would like you to do is to pause the program and find and identify the two logical fallacies in the following paragraph. It's from a speech that Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy delivered in 1950, in which he claimed that the State Department was infested with communists. We discussed that briefly before. Then come back. There are two logical fallacies in his argument. The first one is an example of an either-or fallacy. The second one is an example of loaded terms. Remember that an either-or fallacy is when you're offered only two choices when other valid ones exist. The two choices he gives are in the first sentence. Today, we are engaged in a final all-out battle between communistic atheism and Christianity. So he says we have a battle between two things, communistic atheism and Christianity, which simply was not the case. Secondly, he uses loaded terms. These include communistic, atheism, and the chips are down. These are phrases that will evoke very strong feelings in his audience. This was written in the 1950s when the term communism inspired fear in many people. Atheism is a term that some people find very emotional as well. And the chips are down, of course, is a call for battle. So what McCarthy was doing was using logical fallacies to dishonestly twist his words and convince his readers of something that simply was not true. You want to write unified paragraphs. Unified paragraphs have one main idea. You create unity by having every single sentence directly support the topic sentence. What I would like you to do is try it yourself now. Pause the program and find the two sentences that are off the topic. Then come back. In this particular paragraph, the topic sentence is, "That's because cats make excellent pets." So what you're going to do is you're going to find all of the details about cats being excellent pets. For example, they're affectionate. Well, that shows how they're excellent pets. They're clean. That shows how they're excellent pets. The two sentences that jump out because they don't show how cats are excellent pets are, "Vet bills can be high, but that's true of all pets. And my cat, a Persian named Buttons, is 6 years old." Because those two sentences do not show how cats can be excellent pets. So when you create a unified paragraph, you start with your topic sentence and you make sure that every single sentence, all your support, all your details, all your examples relate directly to that topic sentence. You also want to write coherent paragraphs. Coherent paragraphs have their sentence in a logical order. That means the order makes sense to you and to the reader. There are many different kinds of order that you can follow. For example, you could have chronological order, that's the order of time. You could have cause and effect. You could have definition, example, comparison, contrast. Whatever method of organization you choose, every single sentence must follow that pattern for your paragraph to be coherent. You can also create coherence by using transition